Very good.
Okay, I think we're live. So, good morning to everyone. We're coming to you from the Accepted Sabbath School and the Adult Sabbath School for the Collegedale Church. And we're live on Facebook and on YouTube this morning. And I know Barbara sent the link out to all of the members of the Acceptance Sabbath School class, and also the Facebook page that we normally use with the Collegedale Church. We're live on that. And Martin's here with me. We're missing Doug this morning. Doug has another assignment today, and evidently he's going to be live because he's planning to preach the church service this morning. And so he's busy with that. And I know that Greg Rumsey is busy with him since he has to do the audio for it. So that's why I'm assuming it's going to be live. But anyway, Martin and I are here with you. And so we're glad to be here. It's kind of, Martin, this is, to me, was a very exciting lesson. And I know you're glad to be able to be part of this lesson because so much of it is talking about archaeology and how archaeology proves the fact that the Bible is correct in what it's saying. It's true.
Yeah.
No, I think that's exciting. We're not just, some people want to just make these just stories, and they didn't really happen. And especially dealing with important areas like Daniel, and Daniel being so important because of the revealing of the future way back in Daniel's time. It's really quite amazing. And naturally, the devil would want to try to have that not work. But anyway, that's going to be exciting. But some of these places that we're talking about are things that actually you have been involved in digs in these sites. So you personally have been there and seen and know more about this. So I think that's great. That's exciting.
Well, it's an interesting lesson, and I'm very glad we talking about this today because it really puts stones into it, dust into it, and hot working days and excited students traveling to Israel, and so this is a wonderful experience to do working days and excited students traveling to Israel, and so this is a wonderful experience to do working days and excited students traveling to Israel, and so this is a wonderful experience to do working days. And
just a second, I had to go. Somebody wanted the YouTube link, and so I had to go to YouTube for a minute.
Yeah.
And just a second, I had to go. Somebody wanted the YouTube link, and so I had to go to.
Very good.
Yeah, so I had to get. I'll give them that link. So that'll take care of that. And you can go ahead.
Yeah, well, we look forward to looking at some pictures and traveling a little bit east from here, far east to the Middle East, across the Atlantic, and seeing that the Bible actually is written within a context of a very real context, so that you can still
absolutely, yeah. And these are some of the exciting times too. I thought it was interesting. With a comment in the Sabbath School lesson that says, what if David and Solomon didn't exist, as some people have claimed? What if their kingdom was not as extensive as the Bible describes? And without David, there wouldn't be any Jerusalem. So, I mean, yeah, a lot of important things that are involved here with it. And so,
yeah, and it's not just a historical kind of domino, dominoes as they tip over.
Right.
It's a whole ripple effect. And it's not just historical. Eventually, it becomes spiritual as well, because at the end of the day, you don't even have a Messiah anymore.
Okay, Benny.
Yeah, you don't look like Janet, but I see you. The camera's working.
Are we too late?
No. We're just right in time, as a matter of fact.
Okay, well, Janet's coming on here.
So just put Janet on. This is Janet Wood. Janet is one of our Sabbath School leaders for the Accepted Sabbath School, and she's going to have our welcome this morning. And I'll welcome you first, Janet. And thanks for joining Martin and me as we get ready to talk about this exciting lesson today. So, Janet, go ahead.
Well, good morning.
Good morning.
Janet Wood, if you don't know me. And we are so glad that you are with us this morning. And we want to, all the things that have been happening in our country and other places. And it's not an easy thing to talk about even, because God is still in control, and we know that that we are in his control. And we just asked this morning, I don't know who else with us, but if you have a special request for God this morning, just raise your hand and he'll hear it and he'll see it even better than we can. So we are going to have our prayer now, and then I have a little thing that I want to do. Good morning, Father. We know you're in control of what's happening. You care about the things that are happening, and you are allowing the trouble that we have no control over. We love you. We hope you, and we hope we can go to heaven with you very quickly. And we thank you in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
Okay, I have a little thing here that'll go with helping us in talking to people. It's just a short little talk thing here. Marta was a hardworking single mother. When her minister sermonized about living a life that matters, she worried about working to raise her kids, and going to church wasn't enough. On the bus to work, she made a list of other jobs she could do, and and volunteer work that she could try. Now, Sylvia was an elderly woman sitting next to her, and she saw the worry on Marta's face and asked what was wrong. Marta explained her problem. Sylvia said, "Oh my, did your minister say you weren't doing enough?" "No," Marta said, "but I don't know how to live a life that matters." "You don't have to change jobs or do more volunteer work," Sylvia consoled her. "It's enough that you're a good mother. But if you want to do more, think about what you can do while doing what you already do. It's not about what you do, but how you do it." "You don't understand," Marta said. "I sell hamburgers. How do I make that significant?" "How many people do you serve every day?" Sylvia asked. Marta said 200 to 300. Sylvia said, "Well, what if you set out to cheer, encourage, teach, or inspire as many of them as you can? A compliment, a bit of advice, a cheerful hello, or a warm smile can start a chain reaction that lights up lives like an endless string of Christmas lights." "But that's just being nice," Marta protested. "Right," said Sylvia. "Niceness can change lives." Marta looked at the old lady and she said, "Well, what do you do?" "I was a housekeeper until I retired," Sylvia said. "Now I just ride the bus, talking to people." And so that was her way of dealing with and making it something for God to show there. One short thing, I was going to a grocery store, and a lady was sitting in a car with a very sour expression on her face. I kept walking. I didn't know her, and she didn't know me, but I smiled at her. I went into the store while checking out, and I decided she needed a smile. So I walked back in front of her car with a smile, and she gave me a little smile. I just hope she felt better. So we need to look for things that we can do that help others to be um, careful of what they say and do, and that we can influence other people with our thoughts and our prayers.
Amen.
So we're going to turn this over to Martin Klingbeil, and we just hope you enjoy your time this morning.
Thanks, Janet, so much. And Martin, let's just again encourage people here at the very beginning. Please let us know if you're on by making a comment in the chat window on either Facebook or on YouTube. And also be sure to ask questions. I'm sure that there will be some questions that will come up as we deal with these different topics today, because there's so much in archaeology that proves the Bible. And Martin, you've been involved in many of these digs, and I'm sure can share some exciting things with us. So let's get started.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Benny. As you said, I feel a little bit alone today. Well, it's good to have you, but,
Yeah.
but Doug, my good friend Doug, is engaged elsewhere today. It's interesting, you know, even in virtual times, you cannot be at two places at the same time, especially if we want to do that live. And Doug is preaching today at the Collegedale Church, and we look forward to that. I can listen to him after this, but he wasn't able to make it with everything, the pre-program and the preparations that take place. So I'm missing Doug, but I'm grateful for Benny, who will keep me connected to reality, because these are things that I can easily get excited and carried away about when I start talking about that. So let's look a little bit. I just want to take you to through a number of very interesting finds, archaeological finds and historical finds that really talk about and connect directly to the biblical historical record. And that's something fascinating, and even more so as it has been part of my life for some time, since I started graduate studies in Semitic languages and biblical languages and in ancient Eastern studies, and participating in different archaeological excavations. So let's look for a moment across the ocean, the Atlantic Ocean, go to Israel, and the places that also are mentioned in the Bible, and some of those finds that are mentioned in the Bible. And I just want you to start with a thought that really speaks about what are we going to do with what we find. And I've been involved in a number of excavations, but the most rewarding things in an excavation is really to see how students connect to the Bible suddenly. How they and it's hard. I mean, it's hard. You know, these are cheerful pictures. Some are very dusty pictures. They kind of tell the story of what's happening at a dig site on a daily basis. You know, the technical work. I mean, we use lots of technology these days, but there's no replacement of physical work, and it's hard physical work. We start very early. We get up at 4 o'clock, out at the site at 5 o'clock. You get dusty. You are in the middle of things, and especially students. And when Southern goes to an excavation, we've taken up to 60 students and staff members with us, working at huge sites with other universities. I remember 1 or 2 summers where we were the biggest excavation in Israel. And then students, after having spent the first weekend in Israel touring, that's usually what we do during the weekends, and then they start working. There's still a little bit.
It really looks dry and dusty.
Oh, yeah.
It looks like maybe you went to Arizona instead or something.
Yes, well, that's Israel in the summer, Mediterranean and very dry climate, and it's a lot of hard work, especially the first days. It's backbreaking work. You have to dig through topsoil if you open up a new area. And I think after about 2 days into the second day, you can see students training after that. And they're kind of asking themselves, why on earth did I sign up for that? I'm just working like crazy, digging, carrying heavy stuff, breathing through dust, being in danger of being dehydrated.
Well, I'm really surprised, Martin, that they can go a couple days before it. I was just digging, trying to find a water line that I know exists somewhere near where I was digging. And after about 15 minutes, I've had enough digging.
Yeah, well, there's the promise always of finding something, and this is really what takes place then once you dig through topsoil and through the kind of erosion layers on top of the side. Then
now where you're digging,
discovering things,
Now, where you're digging, are you digging straight down below the ground level, or are you digging where it's already been dug and you're down several feet in the ground before you start digging, or what's?
It depends. It depends. When we open a new site or a new square, we would start right from the top. And then if we return to this eventually after a year, next season, we then would continue where we left off. It depends, of course, what's in there, what we found, what we're still hoping to find based on what we have found. But there's this incredible moment that I just want to get to when students suddenly find their first object. And you can see that on some of the pictures, the faces of students when they actually come across an object, and they are then trying to be very careful. Things slow down. They see pottery lying there, and then maybe a full object, and suddenly you can see something changing in them.
Yeah, like this girl on the right.
Yeah, like this is a Southern student. These are all Southern students. She's now a pastor. Wonderful. Judith is her name. Wonderful student, and you can just see her face. I mean, it's a moment as if you would make a phone call to a person that lived, in this case, 2,700 years ago. Suddenly you make a connection. See, you realize the last person who held this in their hand, and we learn about the historical context of everything we find, lived 2,700 years ago. And we know about the circumstance, for example, the destruction. I'll talk about that as we go. So this is...
Do you have a minute to explain what this instrument
comes alive?
This instrument that this girl down at the bottom is looking through?
This is a theodolite, or a total station. It's a GPS. It's a GPS level, if you want to say so, because we need to put every little find that we have into a very absolute data grid in terms of space, and when we excavated it, and the exact point where we found it, which is then later used when we do drawings, when we reconstruct. Because once you take something out of the ground, it's gone. It's gone. I mean, archaeology is a destructive science where we take things away that we can never put back. But let's look
kind of like in a hospital. It's kind of like in the hospital where you have to keep a record. You spend more time keeping records than you do taking care of patients, maybe.
Yeah, they're different people and different jobs. That people that focus on certain days on the record. So students kind of learn all of this as we go along. Let's look at a little bit at some of the sites. Southern has been involved in a number of digs. I've been involved in two of them. One at Kirbet Kayafa, the biblical Sharayim. I'll talk about that first a little bit. And the second one at Tel Lachish. And both of them were fascinating sites and contribute some incredible details to the historicity of the Bible, to understanding that the Bible is a book that was written right in the middle of history, and points to that. So Kayafa, if you can look there, you can. Here's Jerusalem, so it's towards the west, towards the Mediterranean Sea. It's kind of the transition between hill country and coast. It's a very fertile area, and both these cities, Kayafa and Lachish, they were at different times border cities as Israel was expanding. And they connect to some very, very historical and very epic stories in the Bible. So let's look at some of those. First of all is interestingly in 1 Samuel 17, verse 52, it says, "And the men of Israel and Judah rose with a shout and pursued the Philistines as far as Gath and the gates of Ekron. So the wounded Philistines fell on the way from Sha'araim as far as Gath and Ekron."
Now, is this talking about after David killed Goliath? Is that
This is the story. This is this epic story of the battle between David and Goliath in the Elah Valley. If you start reading 1 Samuel 17, you read the story of David and Goliath there. And this is right at the end, after David has killed Goliath. You have this scramble where the Philistines escape, and the Israelites eventually realize what is happening, and they come out and pursue. And you have the mention of this place name. Now, Gath and Ekron, we know were Philistine cities, but Sharaim, we did not know until we started excavating a site called the modern name of the site is Kirbet Kayafa. And we realized, and this was the fascinating part of it, it fits right in the geography. It overlooks the valley of Elah, where that battle took place. I'll have a photo of that in a moment. But the fascinating part of it is that the name Sha'arayim in Hebrew means city of two gates. Now, in ancient times, especially during the 10th century BC, you don't have a lot of cities that have two gates. If you build a city, you would be very careful to only put one gate, because that's the weakest point, and you have to defend it. So there, outside of Jerusalem, you don't find cities with two gates. And this is a city because it's actually, if you look at the geography of it, it lies on the crossroads of, and it's still today, it's a crossroad of two roads in Israel. One comes from the north to the south, from Bet Shemesh and downwards towards the south, and the other one comes from the east towards the west, down from Hebron towards the coast. So
now, where does this city that we're looking at with the two gates, where is that relative to where the actual battle took place, where David killed Goliath?
Let me show you the next slide, where you can see exactly where you overlook that valley. So it's right on top of that valley. But this city that we excavated, we found two gates. So this is, and there comes the identification of a site that had not been found before that. Here you can see the drawing of that. You've got here the gate, the southern gate, and then you've got the western gate.
Mm-hmm.
And you've got the gates here from the top here. This is the first one is the western gate. And you have the typical four-room gates. You have the gate chambers, very typical of the 10th century BC. And then at the bottom, you've got the southern gate, which is the Elah Valley. And this is where the epic battle between David and Goliath took place. There's a beautiful orchard there nowadays. I've walked down that valley. A lot of tourists have come to Israel at the bottom of, you can't see it from here, but close to the rock face that goes down there into the valley, there is a little creek, and a lot of tourist bus stop there, and you can see tourists jumping out into the creek and to the riverbed, and usually in the summer it's dry, and picking up stones. And of course, the story of Goliath is the story where he picked up the stones from this creek and then faced the giant. So we have a wonderful correlation here, actually, of an identification of a biblical city through that excavation from 2007 to 13 that hadn't been known before that. And
so when they were escaping, then they would have come from the valley up on this hill.
They needed to go west. They needed to get back to
okay.
So they needed to get past that city, and that is where we have the description in 1 Samuel 17 verse 52, fitting the geography perfect. Some other things, and if we spoke about that we found at that site as well. We found the oldest Hebrew inscription. We talked about that at an earlier lesson. It is a piece of pottery and you can see a photo. Usually in the afternoon when we come back from the site, teams wash the pottery that we have excavated in the morning, in order for us then to read it the next day. Once it's dried, the staff members then read the pottery, which basically means to identify to which period it belongs. And at one of those pottery washings, a student in 2008 found a shirt that was actually inscribed. And very often people in ancient times used pottery sherds as writing materials, and we realized that we had the oldest Hebrew inscription. The text on it has a lot to do with the Bible. It talks about ethical things like judging justly, taking care of the widow, the resident alien, the poor, the children. All of this we know from the Old Testament. So this was a very fascinating site. It's the oldest inscription that we found up to date. Another inscription that I haven't talked about was again connecting very closely to the biblical record. We found a storage jar. This is actually the top, as if you would be looking down on a big storage jar about 3 feet high. And this is partly reconstructed. It was put together, and we found those pieces and reassembled them, all of belonging to the same pot. And you can see before that pot was burned, when the potter made this pot, he incised in the still soft clay, he incised letters, and you can see those letters here at the top going around the neck of this jar, of this each storage jar. And it's
amazing that these things last this long, but I guess, they were doing the natural thing. I mean, here they have the soft clay, which
yes,
they can write in, but once it's baked, and
once
looking at
burned,
that country, all they'd have to do is be outside to be baked. But anyway,
once it's burned, it becomes permanent.
Yeah,
of course, it's in the ground, and the ground preserves this for us. This is 3,000 years. We're talking about 3,000 years. And the inscription, that little inscription that you see there at the top, reads Eshbaal, son of Beda. Now we have in 1 Chronicles 9:39. We read Ner fathered Kish, Kish fathered Saul, Saul fathered Jonathan, Malchishua, Abinadab, and Eshbaal. So this is a perfect connection to one of the sons of Saul. Now Eshbaal means, the word Eshbaal means man of Baal. We know this whole story of transition into the monarchy, and this find was so important. I don't know if you can see the photo here at the bottom well, because this is the excavator, a colleague of mine, Professor Garfinkel from the Hebrew University. We've been working together with him for a number of years. And this find was so important that the Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, who is here in the photo, asked this to be brought to the Knesset, to the parliament in Jerusalem. And because he realized this is an incredible connection to the biblical record. And as the head of state, he asked this to be brought to the parliament, and he wanted to look at it, and it was a big media event. So this was a fascinating find as well. Again, connecting very directly to the Bible. Let's go to the second side. This is now Tel Lachish, Lachish in the Bible. This was from 2013 to 2017. This is the Assyrian destruction. This is the time of Hezekiah. This is now, we're 300 years down the road. Israel and Judah have split after the death of King Solomon, and Lachish is the biggest city outside of Jerusalem. It's the second most important city after Jerusalem during that period in Judah. And it's a huge site. It's a huge site, 49 acres. This is a big site. You can see it here from the top, surrounded by beautiful vineyards, a little bit further south. And that site in 701 BC was invaded, not just that side, the whole of Judah, by the Assyrian king Sennacherib. And we have this on the right-hand side. This is a historical document from Assyria, from we call it Sennacherib's Annals. It's also called as a Tyler prison. It's a prison again made out of clay, inscribed everywhere, and then baked. And then again, it becomes a permanent record, and you can see it there. And it's about 38 centimeters high. It's about that. How much? A little bit over 3 feet, I guess. In archaeology, everything is metric. and has 6 sides, and it records Sennacherib's destruction of Judah in 701 BC. And
yeah, this was mentioned in Monday in our lesson about
yes,
yeah.
yes, that is right what we discussed there. Now, if you read in 2 Kings 18 verse 13, in the 14th year of King Hezekiah, Sennacherib, king of Assyria, came up against all the fortified cities of Judah and took them. Now, it was so important, even in the history of Assyria, that Sennacherib, when he came home, he created a relief. It's a huge relief that you can still visit today in the British Museum in London. It's 8 meters. One side of it is 8 meters. It's 8 yards, more or less, across a room. It was part of his throne room. And it very graphically, it's called the Lachish room, actually, in Nineveh, in Mesopotamia, was excavated in 1849. And it describes the destruction of Lachish. Now, it's interesting. We know that Sennacherib never managed to conquer Jerusalem because the angel of the Lord prevented him and made him return to Mesopotamia after the angel of the Lord killed 185,000 Assyrians. So he couldn't really put up a relief of his most prized conquest, which would have been Jerusalem. So he took the second best, which was Lachish, and he made a relief. It's very graphic if you look at it carefully. It shows the Assyrians impaling people. It was brutal warfare, and the Assyrians were known for their cruelty, as we know from the book of Jonah as well. But again, we have a very close connection between the biblical record and what we have in history and in the archaeological and historical record. Let's look at something else that we've found at Lachish. Now, this is what I really love and what I've specialized in, and this is ancient seals. These are very small objects. If you look at your thumbnail, this is usually about the size of an ancient seal here, and we have found throughout history seals from very important people that are mentioned in the Bible. We've got Jeroboam's seal, Jezebel's seal, the Ushna seal. By the way, the Ushna seal was on display at Southern Adventist University at the museum for some time in our last temporary exhibit that we had. You can see it, and actually belongs to Yale University. So we have a number of seals from very important people, biblical personalities. And one of my big hopes was, and whenever I go excavate, is to find seals or seal impressions. Some of these are just impressions of seals. And when we excavated Lachish, we actually did find some very important seal impressions. And that was really, I must say, this is one of the highlights of my career. We were excavating a house, and you can see it here from the top. This is the excavation pit, or the squares that have been connected. And this was the house of a very important Assyrian person, because it was right next to a palace courtyard wall, a huge wall. There was a palace courtyard at the top of Lachish, where the king the governor would have been housed, and the king, when he visited Lachish, would have been housed.
So in order to have these impressions, what would they have stamped the ring in? What would they have pushed that into in order to make that impression?
Yes, let me show you what we found. So we found in this room here on the left-hand side that you see, we found this huge destruction debris, and inside of that we found a little juglet. Now, this is how that juglet looked just after we had taken it out, after recording everything, taking photos. And this is one of our students, and actually my son David, my middle son David, this is he looks a little bit different now. He's 16 now, but this was in 2014. And he was part of that excavation, and he was so excited to be part of excavating this dipper juglet. Now, I know that dipper juglet, these are little juglets that are used usually to dip out from a bigger juglet, like oil. If you want to dip out a little bit of oil, you don't want to have a 3-foot storage vessel tipping over into a pan or using it for cooking. You just dip something little out and use it. But I also know that dipper juglets were used to hoard very important objects very often. We found jewelry, silver. We found also seals inside of these dipper juglets. And when we got this completely intact dipper juglet, we started taking out the sediment inside the dipper juglet, and this is what we found inside. We found 4 seal impressions. So these are not the seals themselves; these are made. These are made from the seal. So back to your question, Benny. In ancient times, you would write a document, let's say on papyrus or pergament, on writing material. Then you would roll it up, a scroll. You would roll it up. You would tie some strings around it to secure it. Then you would take a blob of soft clay and kind of put it around bind it around this cord, this string, and press it together, smooth it out, and then you would take off your seal. In later times, we have seal rings, but during biblical times, usually seals were worn around the neck on strings or around the wrist. And it's, if you remember, Songs of Solomon, chapter 8, verse 6 to 7, which happened to be my wedding text, bind me like a seal on your heart. This is exactly that imagery.
Interesting.
And we found 4 of those seal impressions, so that's pressed into this soft clay, and we found 4 of those seal impressions inside that. 2 were complete. Now again, this is the size of the tip of your thumb, like your thumbnail. These are small objects, and it's a miracle to find them because they were not burned. You could not burn seal impressions because they were already attached to a document. So by them being, and probably the person who received those documents took them carefully off as a proof of receipt, put them into the dipper juglet, to kind of have a record of that and to protect them. And in the destruction of the city, this little dipper juglet served like a little kiln and burned those little clay objects and preserved them for us. Now, the fascinating part of that is, and all of them had the same motive there, and you can see that here. This is we call that the grazing doe motive. These are 2 little does, deers, and we see that a lot here. If we in Tennessee, if you go through the forest driving in the morning, you often see on Tucker Road that I drive down to Southern, often see deers grazing in the meadow in the morning. This is an image that was often used in biblical times, and we have that from the time of Isaiah as well. We have Isaiah seal that has the same motive. Yes.
Or we see them by looking out the back window and see them crunching on Barbara's flowers.
Well, that's probably not so welcome. The fascinating part of 2 of those seals, there were 2 seal impressions that were made from the same seal. They were identical. They were perfectly preserved. You could already read them in the field, and they have 2 lines of inscription: a top line and a bottom line, and then the image in between. And that red belonged to Eliakim, son of Yehuzerach. And after studying, and we've published that in professional journals, and we made a good case for connecting this to the Eliakim, the son of Hilkiah, that was over the household of Hezekiah. You have this in 2 Kings 18:17-18, which was the steward, kind of the administrator of the king's property. Fascinating find, again connecting something with a biblical name, with a biblical story. And of course, for students, as they look over your shoulder, as they learn about what they're seeing, and this is a life-changing experience. Let's go to Daniel. So we got just going down the timeline here. We had 10th century, then we had 701 BC, the Assyrian destruction. Now we are in the late 7th, beginning of the 6th century, time of David. Now, I was born in Berlin, in West Berlin at that time. It was before the reunification of Germany. And in East Berlin, there is a very famous museum. It's the Pergamon Museum. And the Pergamon Museum houses one of the most important exhibits is the famous Ishtar Gate. It's the gate from Babylon, excavated by a German excavation team in the 1900s. They took the whole gate apart. It's about 40,000 bricks and pieces, labeled them carefully, put them into crates, shipped them to Germany, to Bremen in Germany, and then via train to Berlin, and reassembled all this. And this is what you see. It's a huge gate. It's a beautifully blue, with blue glazed tiles adorned gate that was most likely the gate. And on the right, you can see a reconstruction. This is only the outer gate of this whole gate complex, which was most likely the processional gate through which Daniel would have entered into the city. Lots of other material that biblical or historical finds that connect to the time of Daniel. We know the Babylonian Chronicles. These are clay tablets that have been inscribed with, again, soft clay inscribed and then baked. And we call that the Babylonian Chronicle. This is a small tablet from the 6th century, also in the British Museum. And it talks about how Nebuchadnezzar appointed a king of his own choice, that is Zedekiah, in place of Joachim in 597. In Jeremiah 37, verse 1, we read exactly that. Zedekiah, son of Josiah, was made king of Judah by Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon. He reigned in place of Jehoiakim, son of Jehoiakim. So this is, you've got the biblical record, and you can put those two sources side by side, and there's not a grain of doubt that you have the same events being described.
Very interesting. Yeah.
Now it gets to even more interesting things. We have the madness of Nebuchadnezzar in Daniel chapter 4, and we have another little tablet. You see it on the left-hand side, a drawing of that. And that was published in 1975 by the University of Toronto by a scholar there, Grayson, Babylonian Historic Literary Texts from the University of Toronto. It's badly damaged, so there are a number of lines that you can't really read. But if you read carefully, you read a little bit in between the lines, and an Adventist archaeologist, one of the early Adventist archaeologists by the name of Siegfried Horn, he taught at Andrews University. We have a museum at Andrews University that is named after him, the Siegfried Horn Museum, Archaeological Museum. He published this then in Ministry magazine. And if you read this, you kind of get the idea this refers to a very difficult period in the life of Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar considered his life a period of no value to him. They are all gaps, you know. You have these dots there that point to gaps in the text. And the Babylonian speaks bad counsel to Evil Merodach, who was one of his sons. Then he gives an entirely different order. So there's this inconsistency. He does not heed the word from his lips, the courtiers. He doesn't listen to his advisors anymore. He does not show love to son or daughter anymore. He doesn't know his family anymore. Family and clan do not exist. His attention was not directed towards promoting the welfare of Esagil, the main temple and of Babylon. He prays to the Lord of Lords. He raised his hands in supplication. He weeps bitterly to Marduk, the great gods. His prayer goes forth. Now, this is a text when one reads a little bit between the lines. And of course, a Babylonian official historical text would never talk about or recognize God or Yahweh, the Israelite God, as the important God there. But if you put this side by side with Daniel chapter 4, verse 34, at the end of the days, I, Nebuchadnezzar, lifted my eyes to heaven. My reason returned to me, and I blessed the Most High. You have this, he praised the Lord of Lords. He raised his hands, and he praised and honored him who lives forever. So we have, again, a case being made for Nebuchadnezzar's for what we read in Daniel chapter 4 about Nebuchadnezzar's mental problems. Another, and you said the book of Daniel right at the beginning, you mentioned that the book of Daniel has come under attack, and one of the biggest attacks is the historicity of Belshazzar, because until for a long time we didn't know really what was Belshazzar's role in history. And again, we found a number, and I've just chosen one of them, a number of historical records and also monuments that talk about Belshazzar. And we have, this is the famous account of Nabonidus. Nabonidus was the father of Belshazzar. And we know that through those documents that Nabonidus left Babylon during the last 10 years of his reign. He was more interested in stargazing. He was an astronomer slash astrologer. It was one and the same in ancient times. And he wanted to go into the desert where it's best to watch the stars. So he went into southern Arabia, Tamar, and he left Babylon in the hands of his oldest sons. And we have a quote from this Nabonidus, account of Nabonidus. He entrusted the camp to his oldest son, the firstborn, the troops everywhere in the country. He ordered under his command. He let everything go, entrusted the kingship to him, and himself he started out of a long journey. Interesting, if you go to Daniel chapter 5, you read 3 times, and I've just chosen one there, that Belshazzar offers the 3rd place in the kingdom to Daniel. Why not the 2nd place? Because Belshazzar himself is the second in command. And Daniel 5 verse 29, then Belshazzar gave the command, and Daniel was clothed with purple, a chain of gold was put around his neck. Proclamation was made about him that he should be the 3rd ruler in the kingdom. Very clear evidence for that the author of Daniel himself know very well the historical and political situation of these times. Well, I think I've just got time to look at 2 objects that connect to the time of Jesus. And the lesson also mentions them. This is the famous Caiaphas ossuary. It's a bone box, really. You know, this is the way people buried in ancient times their loved ones. In putting, usually the bodies were put into rock-hewn tombs, and with this dry climate, the bodies would decompose, and eventually bones were left. And very often those tombs then, people would eventually gather the bones and put them into those stone containers, ossuaries, we call them ossuaries. And we have an ossuary from the time of Christ, from the 1st century AD, which has on the left-hand side, you can see it here a little bit, and here you've got the full inscription. You've got an inscription which reads Yehoseph Bar Kapha, Joseph, son of Caiaphas, and this is really was the nickname of Caiaphas there. And people have fairly widely suggested that this must have been the bones of the Caiaphas, that the high priest at the time of Jesus. Let me mention one last one. We have the so-called Pilate stone, or the Pontius Pilate's inscription at Caesarea Maritima. It's a beautiful archaeological site on the coast of Israel. A wonderful site to visit, with a lot of Roman remains, and one of them was a limestone partially broken slab that reads here, or that describes as Pontius Pilate as prefect of Judea. And there's some damage on that, but you can still see a replica of that if you visit that site and go along there. And again, we've got personnel, and this is just taking a small slice of evidence that runs through the Bible and points to the historicity of the Bible. Now, what do we do with all of that? And let me just finish here. What do we do with all of this evidence? I see it in the. Let me go back to the students that we take to Israel and that are exposed to these excavations. It's really a life-changing experience when you suddenly realize that this Word of God, the Bible that you open, is not just a story. It's not fictional. It's not mythical. It's not something that has been thought up by some brilliant author. It is really a record of historical events of real places, and we have the incredible possibilities to touch those things, to look at those things, to excavate those things, and suddenly the Bible comes alive, and you realize if that Bible is historical, then its message must also be historical, and that's the message of salvation. That this is a real message of salvation with a real God, with a real Jesus that's resurrected, and will eventually come back to take us home.
Amen.
Shall we finish with a word of prayer?
Yes, let's do
We
it.
pray. Our Lord and Heavenly Father, we thank you for what we could look at, I remember not just looking at it. I remember the moments out in the field where we're actually touching those things, and where we were excavating, where we were sweating and being covered in dust, and suddenly realizing that these are the exact same conditions that you experienced when those things were happening, when those objects were finding their way into the ground, when places were destroyed, when all the historical events took place that we read about in the Bible. I pray that as archaeology confirms our faith, that our faith will grow stronger, and that our faith will not be based on the object, but on what you have done through them, which is coming to earth and redeeming us, and living a humble life, and dying for us, and being resurrected, and giving us the hope of an eternal life. I pray for a blessing also for our speaker at Collegedale Church, Dr. Jacobs, today, in your name. Amen.
Amen. Thanks so much, Martin. Very
Thank you,
interesting.
Benny.
And just thank every one of you for joining us. And I hope you have a blessed remainder of your Sabbath.
Thank you.